So today we are going to talk about one more process in the process group of ASPICE for cybersecurity, which is SEC.4, risk treatment validation. So as you know, in the last episodes we have spoken about different other processes related to cybersecurity, and today we are going to talk about the SEC.4, risk treatment validation. So like always, we will first start with some kind of an overview, go through what is the purpose, what are the best practices, and then we'll try to go a bit deeper into individual best practices, take some questions, and also talk about what are the confusions or what people need to remember when they are living these processes in their project. So the process name is, as I told, risk treatment validation. What is the process purpose? The purpose of risk treatment validation is to confirm that the integrated system achieves the associated cyber security goals. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, when I look at the purpose, I'm already identifying some kind of, let's say, inconsistency or some kind of a confusion which may occur, because as always we have been telling that cybersecurity goals is something more relevant for the OEM. I mean, time and again we have also got some questions related to that. How are you sure that it is only relevant to the OEM? Maybe that is something where we need to clarify again, what do we mean by that? Yeah. So we have always understood that item is something which in combination, yeah, different items come together and form the entire vehicle, and system or a multiple system come together and form an item. And if you look at the ISO 21434, we have always seen the cybersecurity goals coming in the item or in the vehicle level, right? So this is where we have derived the understanding that in majority of the cases, item or a vehicle, these two levels are actually handled by the OEM. So this is where we are interpreting that cybersecurity goals are, in majority of the cases are handled by the OEMs. Yeah. There could be some cases where somebody may say that, okay, my tier one is actually contributing to an item or even developing an item. Um, in my opinion, it is not that easy to, let's say, say that, okay, is this a system or is it an item? This is actually, based on how do they define or what does this particular system do? If at all it is actually fulfilling some functionality at the vehicle level, we can even call it as an item or term it as an item. But as we normally see, most of the tier ones are actually building a system. When they say a product, be it an infotainment or I don't know, gear lever or something else, the ECUs, they are building a system which, when integrated with multiple other systems coming from different system suppliers, form a bigger functionality item which fulfills some feature at the vehicle level. So this is where we got to be a bit flexible, not to think that, okay, whenever I say cybersecurity goal, it's always belongs to the OEM, rather to think in a way that in majority of the cases item is handled by the vehicle manufacturer. So that is where we say that since cybersecurity goals are related to item or a vehicle level, this also has to be handled by the OEM. So that's how we have to understand. So this is where, when I look at this particular purpose, when I read that to confirm that integrated system achieves the associated cybersecurity goal, the right way to interpret, in my opinion, is that integrated system, I need to always verify it against the system security specification, which in turn fulfills the cybersecurity goals which are defined in the item level or the vehicle level. That is how I would interpret it, rather to think that, okay, against my system there is a cybersecurity goal. I wouldn't think like that. So that is my interpretation. Now I will quickly run through the base practices. What are the base practices? And then, as I told, we will deeply jump into the discussion about what are these base practices and what to keep in mind. So the base practice one is about develop a risk treatment validation strategy. Very typical base practice. Even in Sec 3, when we discussed in one of our last episodes, we have also discussed about the strategy. So once again, in the Sec 4, we are talking about developing a risk treatment validation strategy. Then the base practice 2 is about perform and document risk treatment validation activity. Sorry, I think I moved to BP3. BP2 is about develop specification for risk treatment validation. Once you develop specification, the third is about doing that activity, perform and document the risk treatment validation activities. And the 4, 5, 6 are more about bidirectional traceability, ensure consistency, and summarize and communicate the results. Very typical, best practices, which we can also see in the other processes in ASPICE. So that said, colleagues, I think the one factor which differentiates this particular process is like where exactly are we applying. Most likely, with the purpose, it looks like that it is something very particular to system level. So because see, in the other processes, we have already always told that this process is so generic that I have to think, how do I apply it to software? How do I apply it to system? How do I apply it to hardware and so on? But that kind of a confusion is not there in this particular process. It seems like this is particular to the system level. I'm really not talking about any other levels here.
I don't
Yeah.
think so. Because if you see in BP2 note 3, what
Mhm.
they're saying is methods of deriving test cases may include analysis of requirements. So here, if you see the SEC4 with respect to SEC3, SEC3 is risk treatment verification. So I went back there, risk treatment verification. What they're saying is they're telling only with respect to architecture and detailed design. They're not doing anything else. Now, as part of that, when you're talking about risk treatment validation, they are saying that it is with respect to your software requirements or the requirements basically.
But they clearly mention in the purpose that integrated system achieves.
Ah,
That kind
correct.
of a
So this
definition
is
is not there in the SEC3, right?
exactly. So there it is not integrated. So where what you're trying to do is architecture, what you'll do, different components are there. When you integrate, the interface is what you're testing. Now here, after architecture, next level is software qualification test, right? So you put everything together and then test it. It is confusing, as you said, right? Verification versus validation, because verification is something you do outside the environment. Validation is in the environment. This is what I understand. I
So
mean,
in
the only
SEC
hint
3,
is
sorry, I think in the SEC 3, it is also mentioned cybersecurity requirements also, the purpose. So it contains cybersecurity requirements, architecture, and design.
okay.
Yeah, even my thought is, yeah, it's a system level. So when penetration testing also will.
So okay, then I will ask a question then. Uh, all right. So then here there is a term in SEC3 we talk about risk treatment verification, and SEC4 we talk about risk treatment validation. So does the normal verification and validation meaning apply here? In which case it the risk treatment validation is not considered the software requirement level, or should we consider it in a different way?
Well, I mean, if we look at the difference between the verification and validation, in one of the previous episodes, we have also, tried to discuss what is the difference between verification and validation in different, let's say, views. So normally the verification, the standard definition is you are verifying your product or whatever it is, software or something, against the requirement. The validation is more in the user environment or pretty close to the user intended environment, right? So this is where the SEC3 is more about, formal verification with respect to your requirement or detailed design or architecture. How does your software behave, or whether your cybersecurity related features are properly implemented or not in that direction, including the formal reviews, everything which comes in. On the other hand, if I look at the risk treatment validation, as per the process itself, it talks clearly about the integrated system. Yeah, so it is not too generic, without touching any of the abstraction levels. So it clearly talks about verifying the integrated systems. And also, when we know that when we are talking about the system level, we are pretty close to the user environment. I mean, even may not be in the user environment, because at the end of the day, of course, we also have to, or somebody has to test in the vehicle, I think that is the intended environment. But the this particular validation is pretty close to the intended environment when you do with the heel or penetration testing on some other kind of a hardware setup. So this is where, in my opinion, there is a bit of a difference which we can clearly see between the SEC 3 and the SEC 4. Having said that, how do we use the term verification and validation? That is not black and white across the standards, in my opinion. Yeah, because I told the initial definition what we all have learned. Yeah, from even during the days when we studied about this kind of a thing in our colleges, that is the kind of a definition we had, what is verification and validation. But now if you see how these terms have been used in different standard, including ASPICE, ISO 26262 or ISO 21434, it's not that black and white, in my opinion. So this is where there are so many other aspects which are coming into the picture. So based on that, we have to build our understanding what exactly is meant by this particular process and what exactly is being asked for.
Let's go deep into the base practices. The first base practice says develop a risk treatment validation strategy. Uh, it says develop and implement a validation strategy. And there are several notes which says risk treatment validation methods and techniques typically include cybersecurity relevant methods to detect unidentified vulnerabilities. Example is penetration testing. And another note says risk treatment validation examines whether the associated cybersecurity goals are achieved. So, what would be your opinion on this base practice?
Yes. So Riva, I think with the BP1, normally, as I said, it talks about the typical validation strategy. So even before we talk about the risk treatment validation strategy, we have to understand what is a validation strategy, which means even before you begin with your testing activities, you need to have some kind of an strategy which clearly defines what are the kind of tools you are using, what kind of test case derivation methods you are using, what are the test methods you are applying in this particular scope, and what kind of coverages you are trying to achieve, or if at all you want to achieve that, and so on and so forth. You need to have kind of a strategy. This is how you will proceed, and this is how you make a decision, and this is what you want to have as an outcome. So that exactly has been asked in this particular base practice. As we can see, it is also not something too, let's say, detailed, but the understanding here could also be that since this kind of a base practices were also there in ASPICE, in the maybe system testing or system integration testing or software integration testing, one who did or developed test strategy in those processes can also able to build or is also able to build a test strategy here as well. But here more or less we have to focus, or we have to keep in mind that we are talking in terms of a cyber security. Point number one. Point number two, there are certain notes have been given which talks about how do you identify the vulnerability, because see, at the end of the day what we have to understand is that the strategy may not remain same for all the product, even though every product is cybersecurity critical, because one product may have different kind of a strategy defined, the other process may have a different kind of a strategy defined. Reason, it is with the associated cybersecurity specification, because not every product, even though they are cybersecurity relevant, may not have a similar kind of a cybersecurity specification, or may not have similar kind of a cybersecurity feature implemented, or may not be dealing with the potential similar vulnerabilities, right? So there would be a difference. So this is where it is the responsibility of the cybersecurity manager in most of the cases to come up with this kind of a strategy where he clearly defines these are kind of vulnerabilities which are potential in my particular product. So this is where I'm going to apply this kind of cybersecurity relevant test methods. It could be penetration testing or a fuzz testing or a vulnerability scanning, anything else which are really relevant to identify. And also, how am I going to by doing all these things, how am I going to provide the evidence that I'm whatever the implementation I did or whatever the verification or validation activities I did, with this, whatever the result I got, I'll be able to justify that I'm fulfilling the cybersecurity goals at the higher level, which means at the end of the day, all our validation activities has to be aligned with how am I going to fulfill the given cybersecurity specification, which in turn fulfill the cybersecurity goals at the higher level. So if you look at the practicality perspective, how does it look like? It could be a separate document, developing a risk treatment validation strategy, or it could also be a one particular chapter in your existing, test validation strategy. Because of course, at the end of the day, you don't need to have a separate document just for cybersecurity. It's nice if you could have, but at the end of the day, that also have certain impact on your configuration management and so on, because you have to maintain this document, baseline, review, etc., etc. So this is where it could also be, some section or some chapter in the existing, test validation strategy. Point number one. Point number two, this is something which is going to act as an input for your cybersecurity test team. Yeah, so this is something which will give a clear idea what kind of a test methodology they need. Once they know what kind of a methodology they need, they can also check in if they have, relevant resources with the required skill set to perform those validation activities. Once they don't know that, they can also check in, do they have required tools in place? With that, they can also plan out how long this may require with respect to, budget or, effort, and they can plan out everything. And with that, they also have kind of, let's say, view about what do they want to achieve at the end of the day. Because at the end of the day, when I'm getting into an activity, I also want to know what should I achieve so that I can say that I did it right or I finished it. So this is where there is also certain kind of, let's say, expectation or an outcome expected out of this particular validation activities. So that has to be clearly described so that, it acts as an input for all your other activities as a part of the SEC4. So that is how I would, understand this particular base practice. Questions?
No.
Okay.
Okay, then let's move into base practice 2, which is develop specification for risk treatment validation, which says that develop the specification for risk treatment validation, including test cases, according to the risk treatment validation strategy. It shall be suitable to provide evidence of achievement of the associated cybersecurity goals. There is also note given, which is regarding methods of deriving the test cases may include: point number 1, analysis of the requirement; point number 2, generation and analysis of equivalent classes; point number 3, boundary values analysis; and point number 4 is error guessing based on the knowledge and experience. So anyone can give their opinion on this best practice.
Yes. So according to me, the way it looks like the BP2, it is closely related to BP1. So as Praveen mentioned that in BP1, you're trying to identify what are the methods you would need in order to, let's say, validate your system or a product, right? So would you need penetration testing or would you need first testing? So these are some of the things that you would identify as a strategy. But then in your risk treatment specification, so this is where you are trying to define the specifications. It means you are using all these strategies to define your test cases. So this is where your test specification, a clear outcome of this particular BP would be a test specification document. Now here in the test specification document, you would try to identify, let's say you have a penetration testing as one of your validation strategy. So what kind of test cases would you write? Let's say you have a CAN protocols. That means what are the penetration testings? Are you going to do, denial of service attack? Are you going to do targeted attack? How are you going to write the test cases for it? What are the values with which you're going to write? So this is where the note 3 also helps, where you're trying to see what kind of values you should give, whether you're going to give equivalence class values or boundary values, or most of the cases, because this is cybersecurity related stuff, error guessing based on knowledge or experience will come in very handy here. Yes, your equivalence class and boundary values are there, which you'll normally do as part of your normal ASPICE testing as well, whether it is software relevant testing or system relevant testing. But here, since it is focused specifically on cybersecurity, you would want to do a bit more. You would want to think like you're trying to break the system so that your system is unbreakable, right? So this is where you're trying to come up with all the different test cases, and by achieving these test cases, once you do the completion, you would actually have an evidence that your product is completely safe. So this is what is mentioned in developer specification for risk treatment validation.
So maybe on that, Falgun, I have a question with this particular note 3, because it is a very, let's say, typical note we find in every, let's say, test process. Because whenever I think about, generation of equivalence classes or a boundary value analysis, it typically seems fine in the lower level when you do a unit test or a software integration test. But when I really think about a system test, yeah, that too, especially with respect to cybersecurity, how relevant do you think these methods are? Point number one, considering even the cybersecurity specifications are also at the higher level. Point number one. And point number two, if they are not that relevant, what else would you recommend, or what else would be the right way to decide that how should I specify my tests specifications?
Okay, so I would rather answer point number 2 first, and then go to point number 1. So your point number 2 was what else, right? So part of the question was that. Part of the question was if the point number 1 is not relevant. I wouldn't say it is not relevant, but I would answer what are the other ways. Now, when we're talking about the other ways, the key thing that, in my perspective, is important is we are talking about the system here, as you said. Now, system has different interfaces. So let's take about any of the system, let's say powertrain system. So it does connect to a lot of other ECUs, right? It does get information or share information to so many other ECUs, right? So this is where the interface testing, what kind of interface testing would happen? It can be connected through a gateway. It can be connected through a CAN network. It can be connected through Ethernet network. All these happen. So this is where that part becomes critical. Now, coming back slowly to the point 1, why I think generation of equivalence value or boundary value or error guessing is still applicable even at the system level is because of, let's say, such interfaces. Right now, when you are trying to do all these kinds of tests at your unit level or your software level, be it the software level, you are still looking at the scope of the software. But at the system level, you have an interface. You can break that interface, but you have to test the complete software also as part of the system. Right? You just break the interface, but then your actual value should still go in. Are there ways where you can break the interface and still break the complete software by putting in different values, or are there ways where you cannot break the interface but still you can hamper the system? I'm sorry, you can hamper the system. So this is where I still feel that the boundary values or the equivalence class values or maybe error guessing would still have some kind of a reference. I still would like to share one personal experience of such kind of testing, a very low level testing. When we were trying to test a particular unit, the unit did work, but through the interface, uh, uh, it was through Ethernet channel. We used to send a huge byte of data, right? And in that bytes of data, it was basically a structure, right? And in that structure, there was integer, float, etc. I mean, the different variables. Um, the way the structure was defined, it was not proper. Like means the padding was not there. So it was uneven padding. Now, when we put a huge byte of data where the order was mismatched, the system would crash. Now you wouldn't know why the system crashed. Probably the first reason that you would think is, okay, the system is not able to handle that huge amount of data, but it is again on Ethernet. Ethernet normally handles this data. So this is where the equivalence class or the boundary class will come into picture. And finally, after a lot of debugging, we found out that the padding was the issue, which was all the way buried down in the unit level.
So we can go on to the next base practice. Base practice 3. So perform and document risk treatment validation activities. This says validate the implemented design and integrated components according to the defined risk treatment validation strategy. The risk treatment validation activities are documented and the results are recorded. So a short note is given there, which is C sub 9 for handling the non-conformances and vulnerabilities. What would be your take on this particular base practice?
Okay, so maybe if I give my opinion on this. So yeah, this best practice mentioned about like performing the risk treatment validation. So in previous best practice, the specification was created. So kind of test cases were defined and so on. And also in the strategy, we have created the environment, which environments will be using to test and so on. Right. So here we are actually performing the testing using that environment, using defined test specification on the system, and we are validating the implemented design and the components. So also once we perform the validation, we will get the results. Like the outcome would be maybe whatever the test cases passed, failed, what are the outputs, right? So that are documented. All the outcomes are documented, and that is one of the work product. And also I think in the second part, as it is mentioned, risk treatment validation activities are documented and results are documented. So there it is like mapping to some of the outcomes like outcome 2 and 3, and also the work product are mentioned, like it could be the review record or it could be validation results like that. And as mentioned in the note 4, so SUP9 is the problem resolution management. So if there are some non-conformance found, that has to be handled via problem resolution management. And however the strategy is defined to handle the problem, all the activities shall be done according to SUP9. Yeah, I think that's it from my side.
So one question on this topic. So if we read through this validate the implemented design and integrated components. Do we actually need to validate the implemented design, or what kind of design are we talking about here?
Okay, I mean, as per my understanding, so and then we are validating the complete system or complete integrated system. So it contains all the hardware, software, and everything. So at the end, we are validating each component. So yeah, here as mentioned, like integrated components. So hardware, software, and so on. And of course, I mean, there are some interfaces to the system which are keep like going down to the different abstraction levels. Like it may be decided by the hardware, then it goes to software, and from the software also, like some components and some modules are receiving that maybe. So maybe, yeah, it is mentioned like that, like we are also verifying the design, or maybe how the system is designed or how the software is designed. That is also being validated at this level.
Okay, then we can move to the next best practices. So best practice 4 is establish the bidirectional traceability, which says establish the bidirectional traceability between the cybersecurity goals and the risk treatment validation specification. Another is establish the bidirectional traceability between the risk treatment validation specification and the validation result. There are note given which says that bidirectional traceability supports coverage and consistency and impact analysis. So anybody want to say something on this?
Okay, I mean, if you look at the BP4, 5, 6, I mean, very, normally a very common base practices across the processes. However, what is interesting when I see this, because bidirectional traceability or consistency or, summarize and communicate results, we have talked really in length in so many other episodes. But if you look at these, there again and again, there is a mention of cybersecurity goals. Yeah, you are establishing a traceability between the cybersecurity goals and your validation specification, right? So this is where it's again not that clear, because when I saw this particular standard and when I wanted to understand what do they mean by cybersecurity goal, if they're using the similar terminology as in the ISO 21434, normally there is a reference to ISO 21434. They mean that, okay, the term cybersecurity goal, we have taken the definition, we have taken directly from ISO 21434. Now, if I look at ISO 21434, the definition of cybersecurity goal is concept level cybersecurity requirement associated with one or more threat scenario. So there, the key term, according to me, is the concept level, because at the end of the day, any specification which is related to cybersecurity, I can call it as cybersecurity specification or cybersecurity requirement. The only thing I have to differentiate is system level cybersecurity requirement, software level cybersecurity requirement, hardware level cybersecurity requirement, and so on and so forth, right? But when I have to differentiate between cybersecurity requirement and a cybersecurity goal, this is where normally the question arises, because most of the people think that, okay, even cybersecurity goal is also relevant for me, even though I am in the system level. And some of us, especially us, think that, okay, cybersecurity goal is something, which is not at all relevant for the tier ones, as long as, you're not building directly an item, and it is more relevant for the OEM. Now, the term goal and what does it mean? Our understanding majorly coming from ISO 26262. Yeah, there we had safety goals, functional safety goals, and we always had a very clear understanding that it belongs to item and the above level, and it is the responsibility of the vehicle manufacturer. But given the context, as in where the standard is today, it could be 21434, or with the ASPICE, maybe with respect to cybersecurity goal, we have to find a middle way, because it is not very clear that cybersecurity goal is a part of system or it is not at all a part of the system. It is not that clear. So this is where maybe the best way would be not to worry too much about the terms, rather to understand the abstraction levels. I think that makes more sense here. So if I'm in the system level, I'm building a system, I don't really care the cybersecurity specification related to my system, whether I call it a cybersecurity goal or system cybersecurity specification or system cybersecurity requirement, it doesn't matter. All in all, I have to know is I have some cybersecurity specifications which are derived which I need to fulfill, and all my testing activities should be, directed towards fulfilling this. Point number one. Point number two, using this bidirectional traceability to the, above level where the specifications or requirements are written, I have to make sure that there is a consistency in a sense that if something is expected in the item level or the vehicle level, with the help of the cybersecurity specification in my level, for example, system level, I'm able to fulfill it. Yeah. So this kind of a understanding we need to have, and maybe until the standard becomes pretty clear, maybe we shouldn't think too much about the terms cybersecurity goal or a specification or requirement, whatever it is. Because I mean, when I look at one standard, I confirm my understanding. But when I look at this, when again and again there is a traceability coming, cybersecurity goal is coming in this, but they are talking about the verification of an integrated system. I think here there is no one definition which fits all the, let's say, scenarios. Any other opinions on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with you because this 21434 is in its, let's say, early stages. 26262 is very mature. It's what now, 12, 13 years now? And the second edition is also like close to 6 years old now. I believe that once cybersecurity, or rather 21434, people start utilizing all these things, they would definitely come into a confusion state where the goals are being used everywhere. So this is where I would strongly go ahead with your point of, or with your suggestion, saying that let's forget about the terminology as of now. It's kind of weird saying that because each work product is defined with respect to some terminologies, but since the standard itself is, you know, kind of in a very early stage, it would be better to just go ahead with what cybersecurity specification is applicable to your abstraction level and just live with that. Make sure that you fulfill your needs. And just to add one point to the BP4 itself, um, there is a second statement which also talks about established bidirectional traceability between risk treatment validation specification and result. So the standard says that there should be a bidirectional traceability between goals, or rather cybersecurity specification, to the verification specification to validation result. You need not have multiple documents here. The standard is not saying that you need to have a multiple document. As long as you are able to show clearly what is your verification specification and what is your verification result, if it contains in one document, be it TOADS or be it Polarian or be it, I don't know, as simple as Excel. Sure, if you're still a fan and lover of Excel, you can still keep that. So the two statements just means that you need to have a bidirectional traceability. It doesn't specifically mean that you need to have two different specifications. So this is what I understand. So what do you think, Praveen?
Well, I mean, from requirement to test specification, which is understood, but between the test specification, I mean, talking in a generic sense, test specification and the test results, it is more or less implicit, right? Because at the end of the day, I don't want to give one ID to test specification, another ID to test results and link it for the sake of linking. But if at all we see a typical test document, then I have a test specification, test steps, then test results. So it is more of an implicit, which means at the end of the day, if I trace between the requirement and the test specification, then I think that should serve as a bridge between these two areas. So that should suffice. Okay, then I had one more question related to the BP1. So this is about the validation strategy which we discussed. So here I also wanted to bring in some other kind of a view to say that, for example, if I'm a system supplier and I'm writing down my validation strategy at the system level, my question is, how should I consider my interaction with the stakeholders, be it my supplier or be it my customer, and what are the things I should consider in order to align my validation strategy with other stakeholders?
Well, I would say this is a very interesting topic of discussion. The reason being that in an ideal world, you would want to have all the interfaces known. You would want to know the other system behavior if that other system is interacting with you. In a realistic world, normally you wouldn't have all those information. So the thing is, how would you derive your test cases, or how would you derive your validation strategy or specification? My take on this is you would probably mock the other system and try to define your strategy based on that. The way I'm saying is, let's say we have a gateway ECU. I'm just taking an example for the sake of simplicity here. So the gateway ECU connects to multiple other ECUs. That means you still have different set of protocols. You have Ethernet protocol, you have CAN protocol, you have LIN probably, you have some IP, you have many protocols. In which case you would probably simulate a strategy where you would test maybe penetration testing on all these things. Some may be possible, some may not be possible. For example, if you are saying a LIN protocol, if you want to do a penetration testing, theoretically, somebody has to literally find those wires in order to penetrate into your system. Otherwise, it is very difficult. CAN internet, sure, you can. LIN, quite difficult. But still, you would still define a strategy generically in order to make sure that all the interfaces are covered. So this is my take on this.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
So, yeah, I think if I understand your question, like you were mentioning about different stakeholders involved in this process. So this process is about validating the integrated system. So I could think of like maybe there could be different departments in the organization. Like maybe okay, someone is testing some part of system, someone else is testing some other part of the system. I think yeah, maybe in the strategy we have to define this, like okay, what is tested by which stakeholder, and how it is interacted. I mean, what are the responsibilities, how the interactions are being done, and so on. Maybe I think that was my idea.
Mm. And also to add on, it is also more about, with the OEM, right? Because at the end of the day, all your validation strategy also has to be verified, and you have to have certain feedback from the OEM, because normally their security team will also be checking if it is sufficient, whatever the controls or the mechanisms or the testing methods you have defined, is it sufficient? There has to be something else, etc., etc. Which means more or less, the strategy throughout has to be aligned with your customer and also with your supplier, because if at all you are outsourcing certain part, then you also want to have certain evidences from your supplier. So this is where it has to be aligned, keeping in mind that who is doing what and who is taking what share of the activity.
So we really hope that you enjoyed our content. That completes our, cybersecurity practices for ASPICE, the 4 different processes. Do subscribe to our channel and keep up with our latest topics. We have much more exciting and more controversial topics in the industry to come, and we share our opinion and knowledge over here. Thank you.